Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this Red Gaming Telecom video, we're going to be discussing the GTX 1050 Ti, the GTX 1050, and finally, the smaller brother, the GTX 1050 SE. Now, of course, we've already had some specifications of the card released, and we've also seen some leaked benchmarks, so if you need that information, I'll go ahead and link it in the video description. But this video is going to be focused primarily on the release dates, the pricing, and a few images that have popped up on the aforementioned cards. So first things first, let's talk about the GTX 1050 Ti, which is going to be retailing at around the $150 mark, which makes a lot of sense. Much more expensive than that, and it's going to start encroaching in the GTX 1060 3GB market, and that's just not particularly good for anyone. This card, however, is going to be launching at the not too distant future on October 18th. 2016 rather obviously. We've already discussed the specifications of the card, but just for those of you who don't remember, it's got 768 CUDA cores, 128-bit memory, 48 TMUs, 32 ROPs, and should slightly pip to the post the GTX 960. So essentially it's going to be like a replacement in the marketplace for it. What is kind of cool, however, is that despite the fact that this card doesn't need a 6-pin power connector, some variants, for example the colourful model that we're seeing here, does actually feature the 6-pin power connector. Now what's the purpose of that? Pretty simple: overclockability and stability if it's starting to do boosting. As you're probably aware, the 75 watts which is pushed through the PCIe slot in your PC's motherboard. However, with this, it can easily overclock to much higher levels, well obviously depending on heat and the normal other criteria of the GPU boost, which Nvidia are currently using with Pascal, but even so it should lead to better overclockability and, theoretically speaking, should help to differentiate itself between different AIB models. In theory, providing that you're quite fortunate, obviously silicon mileage may vary as usual, but you're probably going to be able to see clock speeds boosting up to around 1.5, maybe 1.6 GHz if you're particularly fortunate with your particular version of the card. Next, we're going further down the tree with just the GTX 1050. Prices are even lower at $120 and it will be also releasing slightly later on October the 26th. Now this card we have slightly fewer details on. There's most likely going to be an even lower clock speed for the core, and from what I can understand there's also fewer CUDA cores. 2 GB for the base model of the card, which is probably okay considering that this card is going to be a bit lethargic at 1080p with higher settings anyway, so most likely you're not going to be able to run with higher resolution texture packs, that type of thing. So 2 GB is pretty much the lowest I would suggest on such a card. I would have preferred 4 GB with this anyway, but it probably isn't going to make the difference. You're going to start running into GPU core problems before you start running into, let's say, out of memory issues. And finally, there are some rumours that we're going to be seeing the GTX 1050 SE. Now, it could also be named the 1040, but this card is going to be really low end. It's going to be, I guess, mostly featured in OEM solutions or low-end streaming devices, that type of thing. As you can imagine, once again, this is not going to require an external power source, and if you're lucky, you're going to have 2 GB of memory, which is probably going to be running at fairly anemic clock speeds with, once again, only 128-bit memory interface. We can almost certainly imagine that it's going to have considerably fewer CUDA cores, maybe, let's say, 512 at best. We can imagine that, let's say, the GTX 1050 might have, let's say, the 640 mark. This is going to have just 512. Probably an even lower clock speed, let's say around 1200-ish megahertz. And it's obviously not going to be for people really focused on gaming. It's going to be essentially for basic, I guess, MOBA titles at best, and streaming and other such usages and a lot of stuff in Windows. It's probably going to be slightly better than the cards you can imagine bundled with an Intel CPU, or should I say the built-in IGP. And if obviously your PC doesn't come with one, maybe you're waiting for a better graphics card coming out, let's say with the state of Zen, this might be the type of card you'd pair with it if you're waiting a couple of weeks for a higher end card to come out, that type of thing. Anyway, you'll have to excuse me absolutely blasting through this video at a fast speed. There is a link to this whole thing in the video description Honestly, I'm still, as I've said a couple of times now, still a little bit ill, so I'm trying to save my voice over the next couple of days, and hopefully over the next couple of days or so I'll be back to some level of normality. Anyway, with all of that said, normal stuff. If you've enjoyed the video, you know, do the likey, sharey, subscribey thing. That would be greatly appreciated. And take care of yourselves. Bye for now.